had a climate march in New York where a bunch of climate activists was demanding that we end fossil fuels and for Joe Biden to declare a climate emergency. We demand that Joe Biden end fossil fuels and declare a climate emergency, or we will vote for him again. Fam, this was a glorified DNC event. You had the Sunrise Movement that was there, who sheep-herds young climate activists into the Democratic Party, and they were notorious Biden supporters. Fam, they had one of the biggest sellouts of our generation at the event, AOC, and they treated her like a rock star.
We organize out of hope. We organize out of commitment. We organize out of love. We organize out of the beauty of our future.
We organize around the Nord Stream pipeline bomber. Hey, AOC, I'm still waiting for you to answer this question. What is the carbon footprint of the Ukraine proxy war that you continue to vote to fund? Joe Biden is the biggest eco-terrorist in modern human history after blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline. Anyone who endorsed Joe Biden should not be allowed at this event. The fact that we have climate activists that continue to prop up the DNC, AOC, and refuse to call out the military-industrial complex shows that they truly don't believe in what they are saying and hurts the legitimacy of their movement. What's poppin', my friends, my family? It's great to be back with another edition of Nick at Night. Welcome. Someone has to call these people out, right? Like, these people annoy me because, as I said before, I actually care about the climate. I think it's a higher calling, and I'm not religious, right? Caring about stuff, caring about human rights, caring about advancing our species to the next level in terms of morality and how we can improve each other's lives. That is what separates us from beast. That is what separates us from animal. The fact that we care. There are a lot of propagandized puppets, a lot of people who believe in individualism, right? Who they all about themselves. How can I improve myself? How can I get my next meal? How can I get my next squeeze? What's the difference between you and a beast? A beast hunts. A beast just care about taking care of themselves and their family. And there are a lot of people in politics who only care about that. They only care about them. They only care about issue when it affects them. Once again, what separates you from a beast? So I care about climate. That's why I'm calling out these frauds in the modern climate justice movement, because they lost me. They lost me. Do you guys remember the people who cared so much about the sanctity of protest events during the rage against the war machine? Where they were nitpicking every fucking speaker at the event? Because surely they didn't want to undermine it. Surely that wasn't the goal. These same people who care so much about the sanctity of these events are nowhere to be heard from regarding these climate activists who turned a climate protest into a glorified DNC event. They rolled the red carpet out for AOC, had Jamal Bowman speaking. People who endorsed and supported the Nord Stream pipeline bomber, the largest eco-terrorist in modern human history. In a professional managerial class, despite the many sins of AOC and Bernie Sanders and the squad, they are trying to rehabilitate them and allow them in our spaces. After AOC's massive betrayal of the workers, AOC, Bernie Sanders, Jamal Bowman, they aren't allowed in left spaces until they reconcile their actions. That is not what she did. They brought AOC there to do a campaign event. Sunrise been doing rah-rah when you know they're going to endorse Joe Biden. And now we're going to cover this here very soon. You had Biden unveiling another government agency and jobs program for PNC liberal kids. And now the climate activists who are endorsing the Nord Stream pipeline bomber, the party that expanded public drilling and oil access, they're now like, we did it. We won the climate crisis because of a glorified jobs program. We're going to cover that. So we're going to cover Ukraine as well. Zelensky cloud in Washington, D.C. is eroding as we speak. But I want to introduce our guests. We have a friend of the network, people people that we had on multiple times, people I respect as well, fellow brilliant Marxist minds. We have Eddie Liger and we have Carlos Garrido from Midwestern Marx. Welcome back to the channel, my friends. Welcome back.
Thanks for having us. Glad to be here.
Yeah, likewise. It's a pleasure to be here, brother.
Yeah, so I'll pass it to Eddie and then we go to Carlos for the people who have not seen you guys on the channel, not aware of your work. Tell people what Midwestern Marx is about and why you guys decided to pursue Marxist education on your channel. I'll start with Eddie and then go to Carlos, just as an introduction for people who haven't seen you guys before.
For sure. I appreciate that. Yeah, we're an institute that was formed after the Bernie campaign in 2020. Sort of during the Bernie campaign, Carlos and I were getting into reading political theory and reading Marxism. And we began to see a lot of the flaws in the American left that you guys criticize so well on your show, and figured that the best thing we could do to help was start pushing Marxist education, which, first involved educating ourselves and still involves that every single day. We're always trying to read and learn and grow our own understanding and then share that knowledge with other people. And look to give theory to the working class so that they can utilize it to organize and advance the class struggle is really the core aim of our project.
Yeah, there's no revolution without education. That's why I love what you guys are doing at Midwestern Marx. Welcome back. It's great to have you back on the show, Carlos. Can you explain why you believe your work at Midwestern Marx is important and why you started doing it?
Yeah, I mean, we come from a very specific part of the Marxist tradition, the Marxist-Leninist Third International tradition, the one that has constructed socialism around the world in most cases. And this tradition sees that practice without theory is blind, just like theory without practice is empty. And when we finished organizing with the Bernie campaign, we saw a lot of the flaws of the U.S. left, as Eddie mentioned, and our main goal was to develop what's called the subjective factor, the subjective conditions, to raise the consciousness of our people. And we approach that through a very broad form, a by any means necessary approach, whether it takes 1 minute TikToks that blow up and get a censor at some point, or whether it's through website articles or academic scholarly journals or scholarly books. We have a publishing press that does that. And as of this year, we have a Marxism school. And we've taught various courses on various parts of Marxist theory for various levels of students. We're currently running a course from Professor Danny Shaw, who teaches at City University, New York. He's running a class on the socialist and anti-colonial revolutions from the Haitian Revolution onwards. So that's a little bit about the Institute and what our aims are.
Yeah, if you guys wanted to know more about ideology and our perspective, we did a great Marxism panel at one of our summits not too long ago. That's why it's great to have you guys back on. It was a great reception from that panel, and it's always great to have you guys' perspective on the show. So this is what I was talking about earlier. I'm gonna give you guys thoughts on this. This is the big announcement, and I mentioned before. I don't buy into the lesser two evils argument. That's one thing I put back hard on anyone, especially the modern Bernie Sanders left, who their whole politics is lesser two evilisms at this point. The Biden administration has been as awful on climate as the Republicans, easily. Doubled down on Trump oil drilling. He also had was the Nord Stream pipeline bomber, the biggest act of eco-terrorism in modern human history, approved of the Willow Project. But now Gen Z progressives and DNC payroll progressives, just as Democrats, they found a way, they found a talking point that they're going to use that completely erases Biden's sins, where they're going to talk about, oh, we have a jobs program now. We have this climate corps. And the people who celebrate this is Bernie Sanders. These are the people who refuse to call out militarism. The United States military is the largest polluter in human history. You had the top 1% that are responsible for 71% of all emissions. So when I talk about the climate struggle, it doesn't turn the workers off, because I talk about the climate struggle in terms of class war. If there's no conversation about class war, we are wasting our time. So here's Bernie Sanders. I'll play just a little bit of this, of being a DNC propagandist. And I want to give you guys thoughts on this, but I'll just play a little bit of this.
Thank you. Let me thank Ed and Alexandria for their leadership role in this important effort. And we thank all of you throughout this country for understanding that there will not be a future for this planet unless we all come together and make a radical transition from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. And that is what the Climate Corps project is all about. What many of us have understood from day one is not only that the climate crisis is an existential threat to the planet, and I don't have to tell anybody here what has gone on this last summer. You got to be dumb and blind not to understand what climate is doing. Not only
the climate is an existential threat, but it's not important enough to stop waging war with Russia. You had the Ukraine war, which is horrible for the climate. Bernie Sanders and the Sunrise Movement refused to say anything about the Nord Stream pipeline bombing. This is the Sunrise Movement talking about the Climate Corps. This is a major victory for our movement, our generation, in our fight for a Green New Deal, which is AOC's Green New Deal is essentially a corporate giveaway. And this is the last time we'll share, and I'll pass it to you guys for your thoughts on this. And then I want to get past the story real quick because I want to get to Ukraine and China as well. So this is if you actually care about the environment, if you actually believe in what you say, like I do. Like I said, I'm one of the people that puts back on people that say, "Oh fuck," the people like fuck the environment. No, we have a right, and if you're religious, you have a godly duty. I'm not religious, but if you're a Christian or any other religious, you have a godly duty to protect this earth. Once again, I'm not religious and I believe that. There's something in my core, in my being that tells me that, right? So I care. So as someone who cares, I'm calling out these frauds that delegitimize the climate movement, right? So I'm sorry I went long, but I want to do this quick presentation. I'm going to show you guys these receipts, and I'm going to give you guys opinions on this. But this is the Nord Stream gas leaks may be the biggest ever, with warning of large climate risks. The Nord Stream pipelines have stopped leaking, but the methane emitted broke records, and I'll cover this on Nick and CJ on Monday. The second largest leak ever was 85 to 90 kilograms or whatever of methane. The Nord Stream pipeline was 190 kilos, so it was 2 times more than the largest methane leak of all time, and methane is way more lethal to the environment than carbon dioxide. In the Nord Stream, 90% of the contents was methane. One of the biggest, people are still wrapping their mind around how big of an environmental disaster this has been. But you want to know what the deeply unserious Sunrise Movement? They have nothing to say about it. Not one damn thing. And I know I went long here, but I want to do this quick presentation. No conversation about the Nord Stream, the most kilotons. I think someone corrected me. I'll tell you guys, I'm not a scientist. I'll just read. Kilotons of methane. The people who care so much about the environment, nothing on this. Nothing from Bernie Sanders. So I'm sorry I went long, but I want to pass it to Carlos first, then Eddie. I want to get your thoughts on the modern climate justice movement and what you think from your perspective as Marxists our approach to this issue should be. Because I'm very hesitant from liberal talking points on this issue that wants the workers to sacrifice before they dismantle the military industrial complex. I want to hear what your guys thought, whether you want to push back on me or not, but I want to hear what you're thinking, Carlos.
Well, the analysis you're providing is the Marxist analysis, right? Which is situating this struggle as a within the context of the class struggle, specifically the form that struggle takes through the struggle against imperialism. And as you just mentioned, there hasn't been a bigger leak of methane than the Nord Stream pipeline bombing, which is the biggest environmental terrorist act, and economic to some extent as well, because the impact it's had on Germany, Europe, and what they're calling Germany's deindustrialization and the threat that's bringing to their economy, which is currently in recession. Some specialists say that it'll likely be in a depression soon. So it's been a tremendous disaster. And none of these so-called leftist progressive groups have mentioned anything. And I think it's important to remember that it's not just the war against Russia, it's also a war that's turning, I think it's going to have to turn pretty soon more explicitly into a war against China, which is, I think, the central obstacle of this new Cold War. And China is one of the countries that's leading the global efforts against climate change, developing renewable technologies, planting forests the size of Ireland, and promoting that this task, which is true, if it's going to work, it can't just be one country. It has to be done through cooperation. And it's doing their sustainable, what they call, an ecological civilization. They're doing it in a way that rejects the binary of you either have sustainability or you have an increase in the people's living standards. For them, you can have an increase in the people's living standards while being sustainable, which means that you can have such a thing called sustainable growth. And this is something that even groups like the Sunrise Movement, when the pandemic first occurred, you had many chapters of the Sunrise Movement putting out comments such as COVID is the cure, people are the virus, sort of thing. This very Malthusian narrative that blames all of climate issues on overpopulation. And it's a form of neo-Malthusianism, an environmental neo-Malthusianism. And it accepts this binary that a lot of people on the left accept, which is you either have the development of more efficient, productive forces that raise the living standards of your people, which is what socialism was always understood as being, breaking through the fetters that capitalist relations presents for the development of the forces of production, or you have sustainability. And China has broken through that binary. So this war against China, if the lens that you analyze the world through is environmentalism, this war against China is a war against the country and the global force that's leading the environmental movement at the global scale. So, yeah.
Yeah, and we're gonna cover that later. I'm gonna show you guys some unhinged segments from both MSNBC and Fox News, so both parties, essentially fear mongering, pushing war with China, very hard. I want to show you guys this. I saw this a little bit earlier. Let's see if I can put this on the screen here. In China, have made historic reductions in their carbon emissions over the last 10 years, way more than the West, 71% decrease. I got to look at the exact number again, over the last 10 years. I saw this earlier. China's first 100 MW, I know what that stands for, solar power plant uses 12,000 mirrors and is capable of producing energy throughout the day and night. We have solutions, dump fossil fuels and implement them. And I've seen many things like this before, new technology coming out of China that is meant to address the climate crisis, new ways of producing energy. And this completely destroys the argument and mindset of the West that without capitalism, without rugged free market capitalism, there is no innovation. The innovation we are seeing out of China is astounding, and it just scratches the surface. But I want to get Eddie in here for your thoughts on this segment, and then we move on, and we can discuss in Ukraine here soon. Go ahead, Eddie.
For sure, I agree with everything Carlos said. And it's interesting, actually, one of the things that Carlos and I first bonded over was a book called Facing the Anthropocene by an ecological Marxist named Ian Angus, who argues that the only solution to the climate crisis is eco-socialism. Capitalism is an anarchic mode of production. It doesn't look out for people nor the environment. It only looks out for profits. And fossil fuels are highly powerful and easy to store. So as long as we have market competition, capitalists will always be incentivized to use it. So you get these two kind of forms of environmentalism that aren't helpful. Malthusianism that Carlos mentioned, which basically says depopulation is the answer, which is anti-Marxist and anti-humanity. And then you have liberal environmentalism, which tries to distill everything to individualized solutions. Just stop golfing, just stop eating meat, just stop taking showers and drink through cardboard straws, and the climate crisis will go away. It's not realistic. Most of the emissions are coming from a handful of hyper-polluting corporations, plus the U.S. military that we've mentioned in depth. And if you go back to What Marx says about the environment, he does say labor is the source of all value, but also nature, because labor needs to interact with nature in order to produce the things that we need. And like I said, capitalism is an anarchic mode of production that places profit ahead of nature and ahead of people. So unless we get control of production through socialism and central planning, it's going to continue to destroy the environment as long as that's what's best for the profits of the people running our economy. So I'd say it's rooted in the anarchy of the capitalist mode of production. And without advancing the class struggle and overthrowing the capitalist class, there's no solution to the climate crisis, which is why these groups like Sunrise and these liberal environmentalist groups, I know there are people who work for these groups who are well-meaning and stuff, but I believe they're missing the mark.
That's why I called the organization out, because I explained to you guys before, the first group I ever volunteered with was Kansas City Sunrise. And the people I met there was Marxist, socialists, people who are undeniably on the left. And then a lot of them left because they realized the organization was scam and fraudulent. And like media organizations, and from my personal experience, I was at the George Floyd protest. When you talk to people who was there, really radical people who wanted to overthrow and dismantle our police state. But then you have Black Lives Matter, who was endorsing Jim Crow Joe and the Democratic Party. You had infiltrators who scam money, and this will always happen. So I think it's upon us to call these fraudulent organizations out, because this is an issue I legitimately care about. It's our community that is poisoned by the military-industrial complex. And when I see the liberal approach to this issue, when I see this bottom approach, instead of looking at a top-down approach, looking at an approach that will help the workers, they constantly ask us to make sacrifices. But this is the reality. Let me pull this up here. And this is what Eddie alluded to earlier. Just 100 companies responsible for 71% of global emissions, study says. So this is why I say there's no climate fight, there's no climate struggle that is not rooted in class struggle, that is not rooted in anti-imperialism. I cover foreign policy every damn show. We're going to do it again today, because it's the most important lens to view politics if you consider yourself on the left. But we have leftist organizations like the Sunrise Movement and all these jokes in the Bernie Sanders left who talk about politics and never mention foreign policy, never mention the North Stream pipeline, never mention this. U.S. military pollution, the world's biggest climate change enabler. The United States military, the largest polluting industry organization in human history. Not a peep from the Sunrise Movement, not a peak of criticism from these people, because they essentially made asses of what it means to be a climate justice advocate. They essentially follow the talking points of the DNC. Everything through class struggle. Now I'm gonna show you guys this, because this is the person who Joe Biden, that Sunrise endorsed, Jim Crow Joe. Well, he admits his giant act of terrorism. Now, you had Seymour Hersh, who exposed Abu Ghraib. He broke so many giant news stories. One of the most credible international journalists of our time, with many sources. Not only do you have him, you have motive. Like if you're a detective and you're trying to figure out what's going on here, you use motive, right? So here's one of the motives here. Listen.
If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring it in.
He just says it. But Sunrise and Bernie, AOC, and the entire crystal ball Kyle Kalinske left that's preaching that Democrats are the lesser two evils, they just we don't see anything. We don't hear anything.
I mean,
anyway, go ahead, Eddie. I'll pass to you guys for last thoughts before I move on.
I was just gonna say, we can't rule out that Russia blew up their own pipeline. You know, I saw that suggested by some very credible CNN experts. So,
yeah, because our enemies are all powerful and dangerous, and if we don't stop them in Ukraine, they're going to take over Europe because Putin is so conniving and manipulative and evil. But at the same time, he's a dumbass that blew up the Nord Stream that keeps Germany energy dependent on Russia. So the West, especially the United States, went to sever the connection between Germany and Russia. This has been a long-standing goal for decades. Have Europe come back to energy dependence to the West instead of Russia. So having the Nord Stream pipeline bomb happen is horrible for the Russian people, and also horrible for the German people. What a lot of people did not report on, which I did report on, when the Nord Stream pipeline bombing happened, where you had United States helicopter that was caught hovering the area, one of the things that was exposed. Not only Seymour Hersh reported that, multiple people reported that. You had sanctioned the United States and Germany Twitter. That was trending. So the German people know what's going on. You had German anti-NATO protests. They know what's going on. It's about decreasing their quality of life in order to have endless war in Ukraine. And that's what we uncover next. You had a NATO chief warns that there will be no quick ending to the war in Ukraine. And my first reaction to that is, how convenient for the weapon manufacturers, right? Once again, Raytheon and Boeing is undefeated in war. They won another one. So before I dive into this topic, because you had the G7, you had all these Western leaders that essentially pledged for endless, never-ending war in Ukraine, like the NATO chief here says. But I want to get your guys' thoughts on this. Eddie, we can start with you. Regarding your thoughts on the Ukraine war, the West's approach regarding refusing to negotiate for peace in this war and the geopolitical ramifications, especially on the food supply and the global working class. What does it take from Midwestern Marx in general regarding the Ukraine war and how we should approach it?
Yeah, a lot of people don't know what I think is the most important fact that's come out since the Russian involvement in the war in the Donbass that's been raging since 2014. And that's that there was a peace agreement on the table, that Zelensky and Putin were in talks to go forward with a peace agreement that would bring an end to the fighting. And the U.S. and NATO sent Boris Johnson to put heavy pressure on Zelensky to break that up and make sure that didn't happen. So, I mean, that gives away the game. That shows exactly what the U.S. wants here, as have, lots of different pieces of evidence that have come out, like Angela Merkel saying that NATO was never going to follow the Minsk Accords and that their plan was to just build up NATO military capacity in Ukraine endlessly. But it's you still have people denying that the U.S. is waging a proxy war when, the writing's on the wall. It couldn't be more obvious to anybody who's paying attention. I mean, it's clear in 2020 or 2021, NATO held a summit and said our main targets going forward are Russia and China, and then began funneling all their efforts and all their resources towards the proxy war in Ukraine, which is just a proxy war against Russia. And something I've been drawing attention to forever is that they do want to make this a forever war. There was an article that was published a while back by the Atlantic Council, which is basically just a think tank that serves as a mouthpiece for the military-industrial complex. And they were saying Zelensky wants to make Ukraine into a big Israel, a bigger version of Israel. Here is a roadmap. Here's a roadmap on how to do it. Like, he wants to do that. He wants to turn his country into an apartheid state that is a constant center of warfare and fighting, where the U.S. and NATO are constantly dumping weapons in, and they're just eternally at war. That's what Zelensky wants to turn Ukraine into, and the U.S. military-industrial complex is completely on board with it. So, I think every leftist in the U.S., anyone who considers themselves a leftist, should be staunchly against the proxy war and should focus most of their anger at NATO.
Yeah, this is my line in the sand. Line in the sand. Like, a lot of betrayals we've seen from the PMC class. They think they can get away with this one, fam. They're like, oh, come on, man, we should disagree on Ukraine. Nah, fam. You're not going to team up with NATO. I'm not going to allow you guys to be Nazi collaborators like you guys are. There's a black market boom of guns that neo-Nazis and other terrorist groups, to be clear as well, are receiving because of the Ukraine war and lack of oversight, and the fact that we're giving billions of dollars of weapons to the most corrupt country in Europe as well. Carlos, I want to get you in here. Anything you want to add? Your perspective on the Ukraine war and their goal to push it and make it a never-ending war.
Well, I don't think that's possible. It's clear to everyone with two fingers in front of them, who can see two fingers in front of them, that this proxy war is an utter failure. In the 15-week so-called counteroffensive, more than 71,000 Ukrainians have died. They've literally started a process of repartitions. Like, they're trying to bring back Ukrainians who have fled the country so that they can fight, because they're running low on just manpower. In the meantime, Russia has been able to sign up more than 300,000 people, and they're preparing for a serious offensive now as soon as the counteroffensive is done. So I think at best, what the U.S. and NATO would want, and some specialists suggest this, is some form of frozen conflict that would allow them to keep that alive in some form, but have their central focus be on China. And Russia doesn't want that. Russia wants, it's very clear about what it wants, and it wants to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. It sees this, and the communists in Russia and the communists in Ukraine that had to flee to Russia because they were abandoned, persecuted in Ukraine. They've seen this as an existential war against fascism, which is what the left here, even the most progressive parts of the left, do not understand. Our comrades over there see this as a war against fascism, and it is a war against fascism. And you listen to some of the recent things that Blinken is saying. These people are insane. They're willing to tiptoe us into the U.S. becoming a belligerent in this conflict explicitly. It already was. We know it's a U.S. proxy war against Russia, but explicitly a belligerent. They've okayed the sending of long-range missiles into Russian territory by Ukraine, and they are much more open to these attacks that are taking place in Russian territories, and that pretty soon it seems like will begin to be done with American weapons, which means that the U.S. and NATO will be officially involved in a conflict, and Russia's not going to let that happen. They've been rational enough and held back in their actions enough, but they don't want this war to last on forever. It's pretty rational, the demands that they're asking for. And, even Zelensky has noted that some of the will to continue this proxy war has kind of fall off. And he stated in a recent conversation that it's not going to end in a good story if the West doesn't continue or escalate their support of Ukraine, basically implying that these Nazi elements are going to basically participate in terrorist attacks all over Europe, which are threats that had been made previously by some of the more fascistic and Nazi leaders in Ukraine. But now it was kind of the quiet hidden part was said out loud by Zelensky as a sort of threat in the case of the West pulling back and deciding to not pursue this conflict any longer. So it's an existential fight, not just for the Russians, but for people all over the place, because it's a threat against humanity that our ruling class is waging over there, and for no good reason. Like the empire is already crumbling. The world is turning away from the U.S. and from U.S.-dominated global financial institutions, and the rise of BRICS represents the fact that a new world is already here. It might be in its infant stages, but it's already here. So what we're seeing is a demented ruling class that's nicely symbolized by the fact that, we have political leaders like Mitch McConnell, which are just freezing themselves, and people like Joe Biden. But they are in many ways a representation of the state that the American empire is in. So they're just needlessly escalating us into a very serious, potentially nuclear Armageddon situation for the sustenance of a hegemony that's already gone. The U.S. is no longer hegemonic. It's hegemonic in one part of the world, but it's already a new world that has been born. And they couldn't even get the G20 summit to produce a statement against the Russian special military operation. So if you look at the BRICS summit in Johannesburg, the Russia-Africa summit the what resulted from the G20 summit, now the G77 plus China summit, like, and now in a month, in October, China's going to have the BRICS summit that Putin was just invited to and accepted the invitation. It's a new world that's here, and either we fight back against our elite, which are the ones that are waging this global class war against the peoples of the world, or they're going to take humanity down with them.
I want to piggyback on what you were saying earlier regarding Russia viewing this as an existential crisis to their country. You had the Nazis that killed tens of millions of people that came through Ukraine. You had Napoleon a generation or so before that killed many Russians during his invasion that came through Ukraine as well. You have banderites who very open about purging Russian citizens, ban the Russian language, commit political violence on their border. Of course, they would view that as a threat to their existence, and that's why Putin has around an 80 to 85% approval, despite waging this special military operation, because every Russian person knows someone who was killed by Nazis. So the threat is real, it's not hypothetical to them. So they support their leader, Putin. And that's why the propaganda in this country is all about Putin has gone in, Putin holding Russia hostage. They make it about the guy. Putin is Dr. Evil, right? Putin is Lex Luthor. He's this evil villain that somehow captured and brainwashed the stupid Russians to follow him. No, the Russian people are smart, right? Just like the Chinese are smart, right? Just like the Taiwan people who want the status quo, who don't want to be the new Ukraine. They smart. We can get to that soon. They understand what's going on here. That's why they support Putin and getting rid of an existential threat. And Russia's been successful in a lot of ways because there was a lot of high-ranking Banderite Azov battalion people who's been killed and neutralized over the last course of this year. Now, there's still this fascist Nazi element in Ukraine, but they've been significantly weakened because many of their leaders have been killed in this crisis, and that's exactly what Putin and the Russians want to happen. Now, to show you guys what we're talking about, and I don't use the term fascist easily. I just don't use it on everybody. You had Zelensky who banned opposition parties, banned left parties, while leaving fascist right-wing parties intact. So not like he like, all right, everyone calm down. We need a one state, one party rule. No, he kept the fascists. He kept all the far-right parties, got rid of the socialists. And you had Ukraine that banned collective bargaining. Oh, shit, I closed on accident. Let's see if I can. Let's see, I'll pull it back up. Here it is. I fucked up. I almost closed on accident. Here we go. Ukraine law stripping workers of collective bargaining rights slammed by TUCs. So they banned the ability for people to collectively bargain. But the Bernie Sanders NATO left is full-fledged support of this fascist anti-worker state. Y'all see why this blow my mind? And I can't let it go. It's kind of weird to me. Now, last thing I saw show, I kind of went long on this segment, but a lot to say here. Julian Assange, someone that the United States killing in a fascistic way, going after their enemies, people who expose their war crimes as a textbook tenet of fascism, cracking down on dissent, waging war against the free press. You had Biden and the Democrats pretend they're friends of free speech and the freedom of the press as they're killing this guy because this guy's been right about everything, essentially. So here Julian Assange explaining how the United States do not wage war to win. The war in Ukraine is not about winning. You have many people just admit it. They're like, yeah, we know Ukraine is fucked. Russia going to accomplish all their geopolitical objectives in Ukraine, wiping out the Azov regime. Ukraine as a state, as we know, is not going to exist. But the goal is not to win. The goal is just to weaken Russian forces and to have Raytheon and Boeing win and make record profits like they've been doing. Now let's listen to Julian here.
Because the goal is not to completely subjugate Afghanistan. The goal is to use Afghanistan to wash money out of the tax bases of the United States, out of the tax bases of European countries, through Afghanistan and back into the hands of a transnational security elite. That is the goal, i.e. the goal is to have an endless war, not a successful war.
Once again, it doesn't matter how
Because
many Ukrainians die. It doesn't matter if they stop Russia from accomplishing their geopolitical objectives. It's about having an endless war where weapon manufacturers win. Raytheon and Boeing win, no matter what. If the Zelensky regime ends, Raytheon and Boeing wins, no matter what. And that is what it's about. Any last thoughts on this segment? I want to move on to another one while we have time. I'm going to keep this around an hour, so I'll pass it to you guys before we move on.
Yeah, the only thing I wonder at this point is whether or not Zelensky will be allowed to stay in power, because he can, the NATO and the U.S. continue to push a peace agreement off of the table, and as they do that, Russia's getting closer and closer. Their special military operation is coming closer and closer to its completion, and I know they didn't want regime change in Ukraine. That's not part of the stated objectives, but Zelensky is certainly a rogue actor at this point. What he's trying to do is get NATO as involved in this conflict as he possibly can, because that's his only way out. He's acted as a pawn.
He went in Article 5. He called for, sorry to interrupt, Eddie, but he called for NATO Article 5 multiple times, which would have started World War III, fam. Like these are things that Zelensky criticized his allies in the West. He's like, oh my God, you guys won't use Article 5. Like, what? Anyway, sorry, Eddie, I want you to continue, but that's a great point.
No, for sure. Exactly. No, that makes the point better. That's exactly what he's trying to do. And I mean, think about it from his position. He's acted as a puppet of the U.S. until this point. Now Russia's getting closer to his doorstep, and he either needs to find a peace agreement and find a way out, or Russia's going to take him out, likely, is how I see it going. But there's no hope for Ukraine at this point. Unfortunately, I've met in the wrestling community a lot of Ukrainians who have been fleeing the country because right now the SBU, the Ukrainian intelligence, is just going around and picking people up, like kidnapping them in vans and then taking them to the front lines to fight because they're out of soldiers, they're running out of weapons. It's a disastrous situation, which is why it's ironic that the people who support the proxy war claim to be pro-Ukraine, when really this is the destruction of the country and people of Ukraine that we're seeing. But
yeah, like I said, it's sad. Like when people say, are you saying that all Ukraine are Nazis? I'm like, I'm not saying that. There are many Ukrainians who are against the Banderites and they wanted peace, but they was pressured by political violence by the Banderites in Ukraine. There were peace rallies that was attacked by Banderites, the people who did not want peace. And you have, like you said, wrestlers, a lot of great wrestlers that come out of Ukraine. A lot of great boxers as well. Vasily Lomachenko, one of my favorite boxers to watch. Lomachenko is a Ukrainian. They got a lot of talented people there. It's a shame that NATO is sacrificing their culture and their people simply because they want a never-ending expansion. That's why we are angry at them, not because out of malicious or malicious feelings toward Ukrainian people. I have malicious feelings toward the Banderites, don't get me wrong, but the average Ukrainian people who are victims of NATO expansion and Zelensky selling their people out, we have to maintain anger because they have been victims in this conflict. Carlos, I'll pass you for last thoughts, and then we're going to talk about some Chinese propaganda, war propaganda I've seen on both sides, which is crazy. But Carlos, last thoughts on the segment, and we move on.
Yeah, I want to bring it back to the comment on Assange, because I think that there's something that's a little bit different with the war against Russia and China than the war against Afghanistan. I don't think Afghanistan ever threatened like a new world order. So it was very clear that the objective was endless war, and there was no purpose besides just let's make a fuckload of money for Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and all that. In this war against Russia and against China, I see it a little bit more like the original Cold War against the Soviet Union, where there was a mixture of, yes, we need that boogeyman that we can install, that we can make the object of fear in our people in order to legitimize these wars that get the donor class, the billionaires, and the military-industrial complex extremely rich. But we also don't want them to win. So like it's a mixture of we want to drag this on, but we also want them to lose, and we want them beat back. And I think that's part of what the U.S. wants out of these wars. It wants to squeeze out as much money as possible for the donor class, but it also doesn't want to just lose. It doesn't want what's going on now, which is like these are great powers, non-imperialist great powers, as Hugo Chavez and Maduro have commented on, that are bringing about a new world order. So I think it's a little bit different from the issue in Afghanistan. I don't think they cared about Afghanistan, but not to the extent that they care today about this like squashing defeat that they've
You know, you had
faced.
many people, you had many generals and many people in corporate media that just straight up say that one of the goals of this war, even at the cost of massive Ukrainian casualties, is to degrade the Russian military, and they view that this war as a way to do that. But one thing that happened on this war is that they awakened the beast of the Russian military-industrial complex, where they are firing on all cylinders with weapon production. I saw a speech maybe a week ago where Putin was talking about this. I don't have it on me or on hand right now. Where he was talking about how he was praising his weapon production, and the West is awakened the beast, and now they understand that the West want to wage war. So the Russian people gotta harden their heart and get ready for that. So they want to degrade the Russian military, but all they do is what I think they're doing is reawakening Russia's will to fight against an existential threat. But anyway, I want to move on to the next segment just for a second time. I don't want to keep you guys too long on a late night. So I want to cover China, but before I get to the segment, because I'm gonna show you guys how both parties, and this has been a theme I've been covering for months now, both parties are in lockstep on China policy. And it's actually unhinged that you have the people on the right that pretend that Biden is weak on China. You know, he's sending arms to Taiwan. He sent nuclear submarines to Australia and South Korea. He persuaded Japan to increase their military budget by around 45% in order to prepare for war against China. He engaged in trade wars that even Donald Trump went engaged. I reported on this months ago. So I want to get your guys' thoughts on this push by the United States to escalate and create a war with China. And you guys will know what I mean by that when I show you guys this clip. But they are trying to create and manufacture a war. I'll start with Carlos this time and go, Eddie. What are your guys' general thoughts before I move on with the segment regarding the United States push aggression against China?
Well, yeah, similar to Russia, China represents the potential of a new world, which is in many ways more radical than Russia because it's led by a communist party. It has more explicitly the interests of its people in mind, and it's a communist society constructing socialism. So it's the threat that it presents. If it's the new world order that all countries strive to be like, is a lot more existential for the capitalist system than just Russia. But what I notice is that whereas before in the first Cold War, you had these very silly stories that were crafted to instill fear of the Soviet Union in the American people, and they would be like debunked by mainstream media years or sometimes decades down the line. What I think is interesting is that a lot more people are smelling these lies that are being manufactured to instill fear and legitimize this war drive against China. And a good example of that is the spy balloon. It was all over the news February,
Yeah.
all over the news. And then in June, I believe, the official that was implying that it was a spy balloon admitted that it wasn't a spy balloon. And then this month, the mainstream media has covered, not with the same intensity as February, the fact that it was basically all fabricated and bullshit. So that means that within a matter of around 7 months, this lie that was very important in building up the hysteria against China, which is how the state achieves consent in its war against China, this lie was debunked within 7 months and that wasn't for no reason. That was because they realized that they affect themselves by perpetuating something that the vast majority of people with a little bit of common sense realize is bullshit. So I think that part of China represents a threat in a way that the Soviet Union never was able to get to that level. And at the same time, because of the objective conditions getting worse than they've ever been for our generation of Americans, people are much more skeptical to the narratives of the state that are spinned in order to obtain their consent for war. So it's a real existential situation, the one that we're seeing for the U.S. empire. Its enemy is a lot better. It's the enemy of the elite. Now, for Americans, it's a lot better than the old enemy when it was the Soviet Union, and its people are a lot less willing to consent to these wars. So that it's that dynamic of the crisis that the U.S. faces abroad and the crisis that it faces, the crisis of legitimacy with its people, that it's bound to bring it down at some point, unless there's a radical revolutionary transformation of the country.
Yeah, I want to, before I get to Eddie, just for a second time, I want to show a little bit of this clip and show you guys the state of the propaganda and the ridiculous arguments that they're making. I'm going to try to get to this real quick.
Maintain open lines of communication. It comes as the Secretary of the Air Force, Frank Kendall, is warning that China has been modernizing its military to, quote, design a force with the intention of having the ability to deter and, if necessary, defeat U.S. intervention in the Western Pacific.
Let's bring it
How
right
dare
down,
they?
General Julian
How,
Chittenden,
how
Assistant
dare?
Deputy.
How dare a country modernize their military? How dare a country care about their national defense? Oh, so scary. It's so scary. They want to wage. We had multiple NATO officials, multiple United States politicians that said they were preparing to go to war with China over Taiwan. Multiple UK politicians talking about, hey, the upcoming war with China. The West talking about war with China. So China like, hey, man, West talking about the war a lot. Maybe we should beef up our military a bit. So then after China beefs the military up because they see the West is sending weapons to Taiwan, trying to start war with Taiwan, the West then turn around and say, how dare you increase your military presence as they send nuclear submarines to Australia, as they send nuclear submarines to South Korea, as Japan increased the military budget by 40% in a historic increase. China, how dare you do the same? I'll just play a little bit more. I'm just trying to speed this up for the sake of time, but I'll let it continue.
Under the Secretary of the Air Force and International Affairs. Thank you so much, General, for being with us. All right, so lay it out for us. So what's China preparing for?
Well, first of all, good morning, Joe and Mika. Thank you for having me on the show, especially on the Air Force birthday.
You guys see the whole premise of this segment to scare liberal boomers into thinking that China's about to wage war against us. Be afraid. That's the whole point of the segment.
Whatever China's
76?
preparing, we will be 76 years young. The United States will be ready. And, one thing to keep in mind is that we have strong alliances with our allies and partners who are able to deter aggression. And certainly conflict is not inevitable in this region. But it is concerning about this aggressive behavior, and we want to follow international
The aggressive behavior of modernizing your military and protecting your territorial sovereignty. You have the West, the United States have both in the South Chinese Sea, and they complain about Chinese aggression in the South Chinese Sea. You want to know how aggressive the United States would be if there were Chinese ships going through the Gulf of Mexico? Anyway, for a second time, because we run out of time, I'm going to go to the Fox clip because it's the same theme. And I'm showing you guys both of these because, once again, the idea that comes from the dumb left, the dumb establishment, is that MSNBC is the left, Fox News is the right. Now, you're going to see in the segment, Fox out, they definitely go in a more unhinged direction. Liberals know how to hide how unhinged they are. They go all out. So I'm going to play this real quick, and I'm going to get Eddie and you guys in before we wrap up.
Look who's back with us. Retired Lieutenant Colonel James Carafano. He's Vice President of Foreign Policy at the Heritage Foundation. It's good to see you, Colonel. Okay, what do you make of the Secretary of the Air Force, Frank Kendall, saying in a speech in Maryland that, quote, the intelligence could not be clearer. China is preparing for war with the U.S., but that it's not inevitable. What's going on here?
Yeah, it's almost like a duh moment. I mean, anybody, forget about the intelligence assessment. Just look at the unclassified information. China is developing the capabilities to have a war with the United States, and not a defensive war. This is an offensive war to take it to the United States.
Not a defensive war, an offensive war where they're going to take it to the United States. They got boomers scared as hell watching this right now. Just like, as you explained, Carlos, Russia views Ukraine as an existential threat. China views Taiwan and Western encroachment on Taiwan, militarizing Taiwan, as an existential threat. If you do not want war with China, maintain the status quo of the one China policy, which 80% of Taiwanese people support. There are Taiwanese people who have criticisms of China, but they support the status quo because economically it's good for them and good for China. So I'll play just a few more of this and I'll give you guys last thoughts. I don't want to keep you guys too late, but I'll play just a little bit more and I'll get you guys in here.
Just look at their strategic capabilities, look at their military spending and investments, which actually are on par with the United States. So of course they're developing this capability. But what I'd say is this is not like Germany in 1914 or 1939. This is not, we're going to attack somebody at a set date in the future. This is much more like what the Soviet Union did. We're going to build a massive offensive capability. We're going to use it to cow and threaten other people. But you know what?
Really?
There might come a day if our enemies look weak when we might actually use that.
How?
And well, by actually going on a conventional war against the United States or its friend and allies in some place.
No nuance. They're
thought-
not even the nuance like the Morning Joe's channel. That's the difference. That's like Fox News. Like, no, they're just going to war with us. How? I don't know. These motherfuckers going to invade. They be in LA. They gonna invade Utah. Do people really believe this? This guy's literally saying that China about to wage essentially an unprovoked conventional war with the United States for no reason. I'll play that part again. I'll get you guys in here because I know you guys chomping at the bit to comment on this.
Or against the United States or its friend and allies in some place, if they thought they could get away with it. But this is the old George C. Marshall thing. If you want peace, prepare for war. Is the way to stem that threat is not to put your head in the sand. Not to try to dismiss it and say, oh, the Chinese economy is slowing down. They never do that, or this makes no sense. It's to build the conventional and strategic deterrent capability. So when the Chinese look at the numbers and they go, this is just not smart. You know, if we'd done that with Germany in 1939, they would have never marched past the Rhineland.
So what?
There's a lot to say on that. For the sake of time, I just want to get you guys in here. Let's start with Eddie this time. Any thoughts on the insanity that you've seen on both MSNBC and Fox News? There are a lot. I know there are a lot of comment on, so take it wherever you want to take it, Eddie.
For sure, it's insanity, but it's not surprising. Coincidentally, I'm reading Michael Parenti's Inventing Reality right now, which is a Marxist analysis of the American news media. And what you'll notice is the experts that they bring on to talk about this aren't professors and academics like Roland Bohr, who we interviewed on the Midwestern Marx YouTube a week ago, who's who lives in China and has studied China the last 20 years. No, they bring on an Air Force general and a guy from the Heritage Foundation, which is like the crown jewel of the Koch brothers network of think tanks that they've created to push neocon, neoliberal ideology, essentially. So they're not bringing on experts. They're bringing on propagandists, and this is both sides. This is MSNBC and Fox News, who are both owned by the capitalist class, who have in their interest expanding their profits and expanding the American empire. And if you want to look at why the U.S. views China as such an existential threat, just look at their foreign policy. It's different from what the Soviet Union did, counter to what that expert on Fox News said. The Soviet Union basically said, we will be a base for socialist countries, so socialism can come to, basically we can have revolutions everywhere in the world and every country can move towards socialism, and we're going to bankroll and support revolutionary movements around the world. China said, we're not going to do that. We're not going to outsource revolution. China does not outsource revolution. Our foreign policy is one of mutual development and complete non-interventionism, meaning there are no strings attached with the developmental loans that China is giving to countries in Africa and countries who have been under the boot of imperialism for years. And we know from Lenin's imperialism that what capitalist imperialism does is stop countries from developing their productive forces, stops them from developing industry. So what China's coming in and doing is financing all these countries' industry, with no strings attached, saying we're not going to mess with your political system the same way the IMF, World Bank, and the U.S. dominated global financial system has done for years. And it's giving countries a completely new paradigm for how they can conduct foreign relations and how they can conduct trade and how foreign policy can be conducted on a global scale. You don't have to be an empire. You can develop relations of mutual development. We build up your industry so we can trade goods with you and we can have more commerce. It's the opposite of how imperialism works, which is holding a country's productive forces, arresting them, stopping them from advancing so that you can exploit and steal all that country's resources. So China's offering a completely new paradigm for trade and foreign policy. And really leading the world into the future as the U.S. empire is dying and throwing a hissy fit as they, I don't want to say fizzle out, because that makes it seem like we're closer to the collapse of empire than we probably are, but throwing a hissy fit as another country rises up to challenge U.S. hegemony.
I agree with Future Homestead. Thank you for $2. Bring Midwestern Marks on more often. Absolutely. Hopefully you guys are down with doing this occasionally. Always a fun stream. Carlos, I'm gonna pass it to you on final thoughts regarding and your reaction onto those two clips. I wish I could play it off, but I don't want to keep you guys too long. But it's really insane. You guys see that guy? China is about to wage a war, so we got to increase the military-industrial complex. Crazy stuff. Carlos, what's your thoughts? And why do you think there's this panic and this desperation to get the Americans to want to go to war with China?
Well, it's absurd. It's if you take it to the individual level, it's like if you have a skinny kid who keeps hearing that this big built guy from across the street is going to come and fuck them up in a week. And then you have some guy that looks at the skinny kid working out or watching YouTube videos trying to learn how to fight. And they're like, how audacious is he? He's preparing for this offensive. No, man. They've been waging war against China, and it's been intensified since the pivot to Asia, and China knows this. So it's a defensive preparation, but they got to spin it and spin it and spin it. And I love this part, ironically, but I love this part that specifically the second interview you showed did, which is they kept on bringing it back to Germany. In the first part they mentioned
I knew you wanted to say something about that.
Yeah. The first part they mentioned World War I and then World War II, and then the second part they dropped the World War I part and they just stuck with 1939 Germany. And what are you doing there, right? If you're trying to develop a new object of fear, that's what fear is. Fear is always conjoined to an object. That's the difference with like fear and anxiety. Anxiety is just like this general thing. You can't pinpoint what anxiety is coming from, but fear is rooted in objects. So if you want to connect the object of China to fear in people's brains, a very effective way of doing that is connecting that object to another object they already fear, right? So if you bring up China in conjunction with Hitler's Germany, you're doing that very, very effectively. And it's producing the ideological ends that you want, which is to produce this fear that allows people to consent to the US's war with China, which is a war that is not in the interest of the American people. That's why they have to lie. The only reason they lie is because it's not in our interest. Our lives are getting worse. They're getting more immiserated, more desperate, more indebted. What the fuck do we have to do with China? Nothing. The only threat that China presents is a threat to our elite class, which is one that we should frankly welcome because they're the same people fucking our lives up. So, and you also get this myth that he brought up, a slowing Chinese economy. You know the audacity you have to have in order to talk about a slowing Chinese economy? Go check out the recent article that John Ross did for Morningstar, I think, the paper of the Communist Party of Great Britain. Anywhere from, I think, 4 to 460 has been the range of growth of GDP that China has had in comparison to the most developed capitalist countries. The US, Britain, Japan, China, France, Germany. So when you're in a condition where this country is growing anywhere from like 4 to 460 times more than you, the balls you have to talk about, oh, they're slowing down. It's completely absurd and delusional and not rooted in any facts.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I did stories debunking that, and you see this all the time if you look at their propaganda. They said the Chinese economy is slowing. The Chinese economy is slowing as you have millions homeless here, millions can't afford health care, millions can't afford food. But they talking about how slow the Chinese economy are, even though they're making milestone after milestone on infrastructure. It's absolute trash. But once again, it was great to have you guys on. Make sure you guys check out Midwestern Marks. We definitely gotta do this more often. The chat loved you guys today. Love having you guys on. Eddie, any last thoughts you have? Any last thoughts you guys have before we send you off?
No, thank you so much for having us on. You can find us at youtube.com/MidwesternMarks and MidwesternMarks.com. But yeah, thanks for having us on. These are the most important topics of the day. So happy to come on and would love to do it more.
Absolutely. So I'm gonna pop you guys in the back. Thank you for joining me, Eddie and Carlos. Remember, tomorrow we have the Sabi and JB show. So make sure you hit the bell so you get notification for our upcoming live streams. We got content coming to you guys every day. So thank you guys for watching. Have a great night.